There is a quiet danger in this world that does not shout its name, yet it reveals itself in the smallest of moments, in the way a person listens, in the way they speak, and in the way they refuse to grow. We often believe that foolishness wears an obvious face, loud and careless, easy to recognize from a distance. But the truth is far more unsettling. Sometimes it hides behind confidence, disguises itself as certainty, and walks boldly where wisdom would tread lightly. And if we are not careful, we may find traces of it, not only in others, but within ourselves. Today, we are not here to judge, but to awaken, to uncover the subtle signs that separate growth from stagnation, awareness from ignorance, and truth from illusion. There is something far more limiting than a lack of knowledge, and that is the quiet refusal to grow. It is not the absence of intelligence that holds a person back, but the choice to remain unchanged in a world that is constantly inviting evolution. You may meet people who stand firmly in yesterday's beliefs, who guard their comfort like a treasure, unaware that it is slowly becoming their cage. They do not see that life expands only for those willing to question, to unlearn, and to rise beyond who they once were. And in that stillness, where growth is denied, potential begins to fade, not because it was never there, but because it was never allowed to breathe. And often, this refusal to grow does not arrive quietly. It speaks loudly and endlessly, as if volume could replace wisdom. There are those who fill every silence with their voice, not because they carry truth, but because they fear what silence might reveal. They speak to be noticed, to be validated, to feel larger than they truly are, yet in doing so, they shrink the very space where understanding could have lived. Because true intelligence does not rush to speak. It listens, it absorbs, it questions. It knows that every conversation is not a stage, but a bridge. When a person chooses to speak more than they are willing to hear, they begin to lose something invisible yet essential. They lose the chance to evolve. For growth does not come from repeating what you already know, but from being open to what you do not. Wisdom often arrives softly, wrapped in the voices of others, hidden in perspectives we may not immediately agree with. But the one who is always talking rarely receives these gifts, because their mind is too busy preparing its next reply instead of embracing a new understanding. There is a quiet strength in listening that many overlook. It takes courage to pause, to admit that you do not know everything, to allow another voice to exist without feeling threatened by it. But the one who refuses this humility builds walls instead of doors, and behind those walls they remain unchanged, repeating the same thoughts, the same patterns, the same limitations, while the world continues to move forward without them. You see, the loudness of ignorance is not just in words. It is in the unwillingness to be still, to reflect, to grow. It is in the need to always be right, even at the cost of becoming better. And over time, that need becomes a barrier, separating a person from deeper connections, richer ideas, and a more meaningful life. Because people may hear you when you speak loudly, but they will not truly value what you say if there is no depth behind it. So the lesson is not to silence yourself, but to refine your voice. Speak with intention, not insecurity. Listen with presence, not impatience. Understand that wisdom is not measured by how much you say, but by how much you are willing to learn. And when you begin to honor silence as much as speech, you will notice something powerful. Your words will carry more weight, your mind will open wider, and your growth will no longer be something you chase, but something you naturally become. There is a quiet tragedy in choosing to remain the same when life is constantly asking you to become more. Growth is not always comfortable. It stretches you, unsettles you, and sometimes even breaks the version of you that once felt safe. But the one who refuses this process begins to mistake familiarity for truth. They cling to what they know, not because it is right, but because it is easy. And in that ease, something powerful is lost, the ability to evolve beyond limitation. You will find that a closed mind often wears the mask of certainty. It says, "This is just who I am," as if identity were a fixed stone instead of a living, breathing thing. It resists new ideas, dismisses different perspectives, and quietly rejects anything that challenges its comfort. But growth has never lived in comfort. It lives in the questions we are afraid to ask, in the truths we hesitate to face, and in the moments where we must admit that we have more to learn. Without that willingness, a person does not remain strong, they remain stuck. And being stuck is not always obvious. A person may continue to move through life, repeating routines, holding the same beliefs, making the same choices, yet never truly advancing. Time passes, but transformation does not. They begin to confuse experience with wisdom, not realizing that experience alone teaches nothing unless it is examined. It is reflection that turns moments into lessons and lessons into growth. Without reflection, life becomes a cycle, not a journey. There is also a subtle fear hidden within the refusal to grow, the fear of being wrong. To grow is to admit that something you once believed may no longer serve you. It is to accept that your past understanding was incomplete. And for some, that feels like a loss of identity. But in truth, it is the beginning of freedom. Because every time you release an outdated belief, you make space for a deeper, more powerful version of yourself to emerge. The world does not stand still for anyone. It shifts, it evolves, it challenges, and it expands. And those who choose not to grow with it often find themselves frustrated, disconnected, and left behind, not because the world has abandoned them, but because they have refused to move with it. Growth is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more of who you are capable of being. It is about shedding limitations, not losing identity. So the question is not whether growth is necessary, but whether you are willing to embrace it. Are you willing to listen when something challenges you? Are you willing to question what you have always believed? Are you willing to step beyond the comfort of who you were into the uncertainty of who you could become? Because the moment you choose openness over rigidity, curiosity over certainty, and courage over comfort, you step into a life that is no longer confined by the boundaries of your past. And in that choice, you do not lose yourself. You finally begin to find who you were meant to be. There is a subtle kind of disrespect that often goes unnoticed, yet it speaks louder than any harsh word ever could. It reveals itself not in what is said, but in what is constantly interrupted. When someone cannot allow another person to finish a thought, when they rush to insert their voice before understanding another's truth, they are not displaying confidence, they are revealing a quiet discomfort within themselves. Because to truly listen requires patience, and patience demands a certain level of inner security that not everyone is willing to cultivate. Interrupting is often mistaken for strength, for dominance, for presence. But in reality, it is a fragile attempt to stay in control of a moment that was never meant to belong to one voice alone. A conversation is not a competition, it is an exchange, a shared space where ideas meet and grow. And when one person constantly breaks that rhythm, they are not adding value, they are diminishing it. They are choosing to be heard over choosing to understand, and in doing so, they close the door to deeper connection. There is something powerful that happens when you allow silence to exist. In that pause, you give respect not only to the speaker, but to the truth they are trying to express. You create room for meaning to unfold fully, without rushing it, without shaping it prematurely. But the one who interrupts fears that silence. They fear that if they do not speak quickly, they may lose relevance, or worse, they may be confronted with something they do not yet understand. And so, they fill the space, not with wisdom, but with noise. What they fail to realize is that every interruption is a missed opportunity, an opportunity to learn something new, to see a different perspective, to grow beyond the limits of their current thinking. Listening is not a passive act, it is an active choice to step outside of yourself, to momentarily set aside your own voice, so that another can be fully heard. And in that act, something remarkable happens. You expand, your understanding deepens, your awareness sharpens, and your presence becomes more meaningful. But when a person constantly interrupts, they remain trapped within the boundaries of their own thoughts. They hear only echoes of what they already believe, never allowing anything new to take root. Over time, this habit builds a quiet isolation. People may still speak around them, but not to them, because they sense that their words will not be valued, only cut short. And without realizing it, the interrupter loses not just conversations, but connections. Respect is not always shown through grand gestures. Often, it is revealed in the smallest acts of attention, in the willingness to wait, to listen, to let someone finish without rushing to respond. It is in understanding that your voice does not lose its power by being patient, it gains it. Because when you finally speak after truly listening, your words carry depth, intention, and clarity. So learn to honor silence, not as an absence, but as a presence. Let it teach you restraint, awareness, and respect. Allow others the space to be fully expressed, and you will find that your own voice becomes stronger, not weaker, because the one who listens deeply does not just hear words. They understand people. And in a world filled with noise, that kind of understanding is a rare and powerful form of wisdom. There is a peculiar danger in believing you have already arrived, in thinking that there is nothing left for you to learn. It is a quiet illusion, one that wraps itself in confidence and presents itself as strength, yet beneath it lies a fragile foundation. Because the moment a person convinces themselves that they know everything, they unknowingly close the door to all that could still transform them. Growth does not knock on closed minds, it waits patiently for humility to open the way. You will notice that those who carry true wisdom rarely feel the need to announce it. They move with a certain calm, a quiet awareness that no matter how much they have learned, there is always more beyond their reach. They ask questions, they listen closely, and they remain open even when they are certain. Not because they lack knowledge, but because they respect it enough to know it is never complete. And in that humility, they continue to expand, while others remain confined within the limits of what they think they already understand. But the illusion of knowing everything creates a different path. It builds a false sense of superiority, where a person begins to value being right more than being real. They resist correction, reject new perspectives, and dismiss ideas that challenge their own, not because those ideas lack truth, but because accepting them would require admitting that they do not know as much as they claim. And for someone attached to certainty, that feels like a loss, when in reality, it is an opportunity. There is something deeply limiting about always needing to be right. It turns conversations into battles, learning into defense, and growth into a threat. Instead of exploring new ideas, the mind becomes occupied with protecting old ones. And over time, this protection becomes a prison, because when you are always certain, you leave no room for discovery. You trade curiosity for control, and in doing so, you lose the very essence of what it means to truly understand. The truth is, knowledge is vast, and no single mind can contain it all. Every person you meet carries a perspective shaped by experiences you have never lived, lessons you have never learned, and truths you have yet to encounter. To dismiss that simply because it does not align with what you already believe is not strength, it is limitation. It is choosing comfort over expansion, ego over evolution. And yet there is freedom in letting go of that illusion. There is strength in saying, I may be wrong, and allowing that possibility to guide you towards something greater. Because every time you release the need to know everything, you make space to learn something new. You begin to see the world not as something you have mastered, but as something you are still discovering. So let your wisdom be gentle, not rigid. Let it bend, let it grow, let it remain open to change. Understand that true intelligence is not measured by how much you know, but by how willing you are to keep learning. And when you begin to walk through life with that quiet humility, you will find that knowledge no longer limits you, it liberates you. There is a difference between hearing and truly listening, and in that difference lies a quiet measure of awareness. Many people hear words as they pass by, catching fragments just enough to respond, but rarely enough to understand. Deep listening asks for more than attention. It asks for presence. It asks you to set aside your need to reply, your urge to judge, and your habit of turning every conversation back toward yourself. And for some, that kind of stillness feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. When a person cannot listen deeply, the world begins to sound like noise to them. Advice feels like criticism, truth feels like attack, and perspective feels like opposition. Not because these things are harmful, but because their mind is too crowded to receive them. They are not listening to understand, they are listening to defend. And in that constant defense, meaning gets lost. Words lose their depth, and conversations lose their purpose. You may notice how quickly such a person reacts. Before a sentence is complete, they have already decided what it means. Before a thought is fully expressed, they have already formed a response. They are not engaging with what is being said. They are engaging with their own assumptions. And assumptions, when left unchecked, have a way of distorting even the clearest truth. What could have been a moment of connection becomes a moment of misunderstanding. Deep listening, on the other hand, requires patience that goes beyond silence. It asks you to listen not just to words, but to what lies beneath them, the emotion, the intention, the unspoken truth. Sometimes people are not saying exactly what they mean, but if you listen closely, you can feel it. You can sense the hesitation, the hope, the hurt, and in that space where you are no longer focused on yourself, understanding begins to grow. But the one who cannot listen deeply rarely reaches that space. They remain on the surface, moving from one conversation to another without ever truly connecting. Over time, this creates a quiet distance between them and others. People may speak, but they do not feel heard. And when people do not feel heard, they slowly stop sharing what matters most. What remains are shallow exchanges, empty of the depth that real connection requires. There is also a cost that is less visible, but equally powerful. The inability to listen deeply limits your ability to learn, because knowledge does not only come from books or experiences, it comes from people. Every person carries something you do not know, something you have not lived, something you have yet to understand. But if you are not truly listening, those lessons pass you by unnoticed, like whispers lost in a crowded room. To listen deeply is to quiet the noise within yourself. It is to become aware of your own thoughts without letting them interrupt someone else's truth. It is to create space where another voice can exist fully without being filtered through your ego. And in doing so, you do not become smaller. You become wider, more open, more capable of understanding the world beyond your own perspective. So learn to listen with intention, not impatience. Let your mind rest long enough to truly receive what is being given. Because when you begin to listen deeply, something shifts. Words gain clarity, people feel seen, and truth no longer sounds like noise. It begins to sound like something familiar, something meaningful, something that has the power to change you, if only you are willing to hear it. There is a quiet insecurity that often disguises itself as laughter, a subtle bitterness that hides behind jokes and dismissive words. It appears when someone dares to dream out loud, to step beyond what is familiar, to reach for something greater than what they have known. And instead of encouragement, they are met with mockery, not because their dream is impossible, but because it reflects a courage that others have not yet found within themselves. When a person laughs at the growth of another, they are not revealing truth. They are revealing fear, fear of change, fear of failure, fear of stepping into the unknown and discovering that they too are capable of more. It is easier to criticize a dream than to confront the reason you have not pursued your own. It is safer to make light of someone's ambition than to admit that you have been standing still. And so they choose ridicule, not realizing that in doing so, they shrink their own world. You will notice that those who are truly growing do not have time to mock others. They are too busy building, learning, evolving. They understand that every person is on a different path, moving at a different pace, guided by a different vision. There is no need to compare, no need to tear down, no need to laugh at what they do not yet understand, because growth brings humility, and humility creates space for respect. But the one who mocks cannot see beyond their own limitations. They measure possibility through the lens of their own fears, and anything that stretches beyond it feels unrealistic, even foolish. They say that won't work, or that's not practical, as if their doubt is wisdom. But doubt is not always intelligence. Sometimes it is simply a reflection of what they are unwilling to attempt. And over time, this habit creates a quiet distance between them and opportunity, because growth requires belief, not just in yourself, but in the idea that more is possible. When you constantly dismiss the dreams of others, you train your mind to dismiss your own. You begin to see limits where there could have been potential, obstacles where there could have been pathways. Without realizing it, you condition yourself to stay exactly where you are. There is also a deeper cost, one that touches the people around you. Words have weight, even when spoken lightly. A careless laugh can plant doubt in someone who was just beginning to believe in themselves. A dismissive comment can silence a voice that was ready to rise. And while some will push through that resistance, others may carry it longer than you ever intended. What you see as a moment of humor may become a moment of hesitation for someone else. But there is another way to exist, one that does not rely on diminishing others to feel secure. It begins with recognizing that someone else's growth is not a threat to yours. Their success does not take away from your potential. It expands what is possible. When you shift from mockery to curiosity, from doubt to openness, you allow yourself to see the world differently. You begin to ask, what can I learn from this? Instead of, why would they try? And in that shift, something powerful happens. You no longer stand on the outside, watching others move forward while you remain still. You become part of the movement. You begin to explore your own potential, to take your own risks, to step into spaces you once avoided, because the same courage you once laughed at starts to awaken within you. So choose your response carefully when you see someone growing, reaching, becoming. Let it inspire you, not intimidate you. Let it challenge you, not silence you. Because the moment you learn to respect the dreams of others, you give yourself permission to believe in your own. And in that belief, you move from being a spectator of life to a participant in its endless possibility. There is a certain allure to chaos, a strange magnetism in drama that draws people in as if the louder the noise, the more alive they feel. Some mistake constant tension, endless conflict, and ceaseless upheaval for purpose, believing that the busier and more chaotic their lives appear, the more meaningful they must be. But noise is not the same as progress, and activity is not the same as achievement. True strength does not announce itself with clamor. It moves quietly, steadily, and with intention. Those addicted to drama often find themselves trapped in cycles they do not understand. They chase arguments, thrive on tension, and feed off the energy of crisis, not realizing that every storm they create is also eroding their own peace. They mistake reaction for action, impulse for insight, and distraction for direction. Life, in its truest sense, is not about being constantly pulled in every direction. It is about knowing where to stand, even when the world shakes around you. You may notice that the drama seeker often interprets stillness as weakness. Silence feels empty to them, and calm feels dull. They are uncomfortable with reflection because reflection does not provide the rush of emotional highs or the illusion of control that chaos offers. And yet, it is in that quiet, in the spaces between the noise, that clarity begins to grow. The world may be filled with commotion, but the one who can remain centered sees clearly what is fleeting and what is essential. Drama and chaos in excess blind a person to their own power. They spend so much energy reacting to everything around them that they forget to direct any energy toward themselves. They measure life by the intensity of events rather than the depth of understanding, and they find themselves exhausted, frustrated, and unfulfilled. The louder the storm, the more they feel alive, yet the more they miss the subtle beauty that exists in stillness, the growth, the learning, the quiet achievements that accumulate over time. Peace, on the other hand, is often misunderstood. It is not weakness, passivity, or avoidance. It is a form of mastery, the ability to remain undisturbed in the midst of life's inevitable chaos. It is the strength to choose your battles, to speak only when it matters, and to act with intention rather than impulse. Those who cultivate peace are not bored or stagnant. They are deliberate, aware, and deeply aligned with their purpose. And in the calm, there is space for reflection. There is space for understanding your own desires, your own limits, and your own truths. There is clarity that cannot exist in noise, wisdom that cannot be heard over constant commotion, and growth that cannot take root in instability. The addiction to drama robs a person of these things because it keeps them looking outward, chasing reactions instead of cultivating inner direction. The path away from chaos begins with awareness. It begins with noticing when you are drawn to unnecessary conflict, when you thrive on tension that serves no higher purpose, and when you mistake noise for meaning. It is a conscious choice to step back, to breathe, to observe rather than react. When you make that choice repeatedly, you discover the power that comes from quiet strength, the kind of strength that does not need validation from external chaos to exist. And in that discovery, life transforms. You realize that purpose is not in the drama, but in the decisions you make with clarity. You see that true energy is not spent in reaction, but in creation. You understand that the storms of the world may continue, but you do not have to be swept away by them. You are anchored, centered, and free. In choosing peace over chaos, you claim the most subtle and profound form of power, a power that does not shout, but simply is. There is a quiet danger in neglecting to look within, in refusing to pause long enough to examine the life you are living. Many move from day to day, from task to task, believing that movement itself is progress, when in truth it is often motion without meaning. A life unexamined is like a ship sailing endlessly in circles, always moving, yet never arriving at a deeper understanding of where it is and where it wants to go. The moments we fail to reflect upon are the moments we repeat without learning, and over time, the patterns we ignore shape us more than the choices we consciously make. Self-reflection requires honesty, and honesty is rarely easy. It demands that we look at ourselves without excuse, without distraction, without the comforting illusions that we are already enough as we are. It asks us to notice our failures as clearly as our successes, to recognize the habits that hold us back, and to understand the motives behind our decisions. Without this inward gaze, we are wandering blind, mistaking routine for purpose and repetition for growth. When a person neglects reflection, they begin to live on autopilot. Decisions are made unconsciously, reactions are automatic, and the lessons of experience are left unexamined. Mistakes repeat themselves, not because we are incapable of change, but because we never take the time to pause and ask, what did this teach me? What can I do differently next time? Life becomes a loop of familiar struggles, the same challenges returning in slightly altered forms, each one carrying the opportunity for insight that is ignored. There is a subtle emptiness that accompanies this neglect. People may appear busy, even successful on the surface, but internally they feel fragmented. They are aware that something is missing, yet they cannot name it. The truth is simple. The missing piece is understanding, the understanding of oneself, one's choices, and the life one is creating. When we refuse reflection, we deny ourselves the clarity that leads to alignment, purpose, and fulfillment. Self-reflection is not about self-criticism. It is about self-awareness. It is a gentle, deliberate process of asking questions and observing without judgment. What patterns are repeating in my life? What decisions have served me and which have held me back? How do my words, actions, and choices align with the person I aspire to become? These are not questions to answer once and forget. They are questions to return to again and again, each time peeling back another layer, each time revealing more of our truth. Those who embrace reflection do not become perfect, they become conscious. They learn to notice when they are slipping into habits that no longer serve them, to course correct before small mistakes become large consequences, and to recognize the moments when they are not being true to themselves. Over time, this practice cultivates a life of intention rather than accident, of learning rather than repetition. And yet, reflection requires courage. It asks us to face our own shadows, to acknowledge where we have failed, and to accept responsibility for our choices. It is far easier to distract ourselves with noise, busyness, and external pressures. But the one who consistently turns inward, even when it is uncomfortable, discovers a quiet kind of power. That power is the ability to live deliberately, to make choices with clarity, and to shape a life that is not dictated by habit, fear, or external expectation, but by conscious awareness. A life without self-reflection is a life repeated. A life with it becomes a life learned, refined, and transformed. When you look within, you see not just who you are, but who you are capable of becoming. And in that seeing, you find freedom, the freedom to step out of cycles, to grow beyond old patterns, and to live fully awake in your own truth.